This story still keeps me up at night. I didn't notice it at first, the way he moved, the way he breathed, or rather didn't breathe. But the moment I realized something was wrong, it was already too late. And if what happened to me ever happens to you, you won't get a second chance. It was October 12, 2022, on County Road 17, just outside Millersfield, and the air smelled of cut grass, cold tar, and the faint copper of rain that had not yet arrived. I was 29 years old, working late shifts at a call center and driving for rideshares on the side to make rent. Tired but steady in a routine I trusted, when something happened in my back seat that should not have been possible. For a second, I thought one of my passengers was joking until I glanced into the rear view and saw a person slumped between the headrests with a skin so pale it seemed to swallow light, mouth slack and eyes open but not focused on anything in the car. My palms went slick and I felt the steering wheel vibrate under my hands the way a living thing shudders. Jenna reached over and squeezed my forearm. Mark whispered an expletive that broke like a pebble, and the radio dulled into static. I told myself to drive to the nearest lit station and call it in, but the rear view showed an unnatural stillness, a faint smell like pennies and dryer lint that clung to the upholstery. And I promised I would tell everything, because calling anyone else at 2 in the morning felt like admitting I had already lost control. With me were Jenna, Mark, and Louise, all of them witnesses, who later gave statements. I say the date because people asked, and because it mattered when the sheriff logged our report. The last thing I remember before pulling over was a tapping on the glass like knuckles on a coffin lid, a sound that lived in my head for months, and I still want to know if anyone else has had that small, precise knock on a night that should have been ordinary. I grew up in a neighborhood of split porches and people who kept secrets in jars on their kitchen shelves. My mother worked 2 jobs and taught me to keep my wallet on my belt and my light on at the top of the stairs. I learned to drive early, ferrying groceries and then friends, and the nights behind the wheel taught me the difference between empty roads and roads that felt watched. As a teenager, I would take detours through the farmland to clear my head, the fields breathing fog into headlights. That habit stuck into my adulthood, and it made me a predictable man to the people who knew me. I had been delivering people for nearly 5 years by the time this started, a small economy of late-night shifts and weekend surges that paid for rent and kept me awake. I was not a stranger to odd requests or passengers who smelled like smoke or despair, but I had always chalked those encounters up to weariness and the city holding too many stories. The thing that unsettled me about that night was not the presence of a strange passenger, but the evidence, the physical residue that did not fit any pattern I recognized, and how quickly it altered the way my neighbors watched the road. I knew the county well. Millersfield sat against a stretch of farmland where the interstate gave way to 2-lane roads and barns that had been boarded up for decades. There was a bridge people avoided when fog rolled in, and a service station that still had a payphone behind glass. Locals had names for things the map did not: the old Tucker barn where kids' dares were traded like currency, the low stone wall called Widow's Edge where teenagers left cans and secrets. I had driven past those places 1,000 times. I had friends who grew up around the barn, friends who would later bring me coffee at dawn and tell me what they had seen or heard. My relationship with Jenna and Mark went back to high school. Louise I had met working shifts, and we had swapped stories about fairs and late nights. That background mattered because when something impossible happened, knowing who these people were, how they reacted under stress, and what they remembered became part of how I tried to anchor the story to fact. The town had its own slow timeline, a ledger of smaller misfortunes and oddities people named and then let sit. That ledger was suddenly open to me and to anyone who would listen. I expected a quiet night, a predictable route, and whatever was waiting in the back seat punched holes in that expectation. If this unsettles you, know that you are not alone. Many of us carry stories from nights that felt ordinary until they did not. If you have ever heard your name called from an empty seat or felt a small, deliberate tap on glass when no one was near, start your comment with, "This story reminded me," and tell us in one line where and when it happened. Those small details matter more than you think. We collect them here to look for patterns, to see if an experience is isolated or part of a larger rhythm that crosses towns. When I read your comments, I forward the ones that align with the geography and timing to local reporters and sometimes to investigators who follow odd clusters. Your account could be the missing stitch that ties more than one night together. Thank you for sharing if you can. Now, back in the car that night, the fog thickened, and what came next made clear that this was not a one-off encounter. The first clear meeting was a handful of minutes, but it expanded into a memory with edges. We had just left a bar where younger people in parade masks were spilling onto the street, the music a distant thump. The passenger, who should not have been there, made a sound like a throat clearing without breath. "Hey," I said, fingers tightening on the wheel. Jenna leaned forward with her face in the rear view. "Is everything okay back there?" she asked, voice high and small. The person did not move at first. "Can you speak?" Mark pushed, louder and sharper. There was no answer for a moment, only the way in which the car lights illuminated the hollows under cheekbones. Then a voice, flat and without the moisture of breath, said, "I rode you." "What did you say?" I asked. "I rode. I do not have to pay." Louise laughed nervously, a small, brittle sound, and said, "Dude, just get out." "I cannot get out," the voice said. My heart stopped. Jenna snapped, "Stop it, this is not funny." "You have to call someone," Mark insisted. "I called you," the person answered, naming me by my last name as if they had read my profile. The recognition of my name made my skin prickle. I asked where they had come from, and they named a street I had never heard them using, and a time that did not match the dispatch logs later. "I am cold," they said, and then tapped the glass, a series of 3 slow knocks that matched the pattern I later replayed in my head. The smell in the car shifted again, a metal and laundry detergent mix, and I felt the leather seat prick cold against my knee, like sitting on the edge of an ice tray. I told them to step out into the light at the next driveway. "Another car is coming," they said, pointing to nothing, an accusation that made me glance up and then clamp my jaw shut. The dialogue moved faster as I tried to keep us safe and to push us toward the service station lights, with each person in the car offering lines that carried fear and resentment and disbelief. Me: "We are pulling into the station now. Get out and call a cab." Passenger: "I cannot leave. I do not have a pulse." Jenna: "Stop saying things like that." Passenger: "You all forget things. I remember your route." Mark: "We do not know you. You are scaring us." Passenger: "I am not a person you can see walking, but I am in this seat." Louise: "If you do not get up, I am calling the cops." Passenger: "Cops came through last time. They did not take me." Me: "What do you want from us?" Passenger: "To be seen, to be noticed, to go on." Me: "We cannot do that. We have to leave." Passenger: "You will not leave, and I will tell you the road that remembers." The exchanges were clipped and repeated, filled with that odd clarity that happens when something unreal insists on being treated as fact. Each line seemed to hang in the car like a cough, and each made a witness step closer to panic or to an attempt at rationalization. In the end, we chose light and movement, and the dash cam I did not have then would have been useful in ways I did not yet understand. We pulled into the station. I called 911, and the dispatcher Kayla took my shaking voice with professional kindness and a little impatience that came from experience with drunk drivers and false alarms. "Can you step out of the vehicle?" she asked, her tone calibrated to extract steady facts. I obeyed, and the cold night air hit my face like a rebuke. 2 patrol cars arrived within 10 minutes, lights cutting the fog in slow circles. Officer Hayes walked my passengers through the routine questions, while Sheriff Crane took my statement, holding a flashlight like a scepter. The officers wore the slow patience of people who had seen grief and mischief, and the hard edges of small-town tragedy. They searched the car, the trunk, and took swabs from the seat where the passenger had sat, placing them into evidence bags and recording chain of custody on a form that felt ceremonial. "You smelled metal and laundry," Hayes said, as if that was a note he could understand, and I nodded. "We will run the prints, send it to lab, and file a report," Crane said. I watched them bag the small ring I had found lodged under the seat, a thin band with no inscription, and the way they cataloged each item made the night feel suddenly bureaucratic and real. I filed my call with the company, recorded the fare as unpaid, and saw the recording on the dispatch later that night labeled as Report Number 22-1417. The mood shifted between relief at being in official hands and a deepening conviction that the evidence did not align to anything conventional. My palms ached from gripping the wheel, my temples throbbed. I felt foolish and justified at the same time. Months passed, and patterns emerged in the way small things gathered into something resembling a case. I got a message in the app from a rider named Rachel saying she had been picked up at the edge of town at 2 in the morning and that someone had whispered the name of her hometown, Key, before leaning toward the window. Sam, a friend who worked nights at the grocery store, called to say he had seen a pale figure sitting cross-legged on the stone wall at Widow's Edge and had the sense of being watched. These reports were sparse and uneven, but they lined up around the same stretch of road and the same late hour. About 3 months later, on January 3rd, a second ride dropped me into a repeat scenario that tightened the pattern. This time, the passenger stepped in the car with shoes that crunched like dry leaves and said, "I have been waiting in the hollow." I recalled the first night and the smell of dryer lint and copper. There was a fragment of cloth caught in the seam of the back seat, the size of a fingernail that had not been there before. I took it to Dr. Patel at the county lab, and she gently explained how they would test it for fibers, pollen, and DNA. "We will catalog it, and the chain of custody will be strict," she told me in her office, writing numbers on a pad. "If it yields anything, we will proceed to sequencing." The discovery of a repeat fabric and a similar tapping pattern suggested a pattern more than a prank. The second incident played out louder and longer, and it involved the community in ways that felt like pressure being applied from many hands. Me: "Where did you come from this time?" Passenger: "I came from the barn you do not drive past." Jenna: "Which barn?" Tucker barn. "I rode through the fence." Mark: "You cannot have been in the fence. We were there last week." Passenger: "The fence remembers me." Louise: "You smell like smoke." Passenger: "I smelled like the oven the night the girl left." Officer Crane: "Sir, if you are injured, you need medical help." Passenger: "Medical hands do not keep me. I am a message." Sam drove by later and said he saw a flash of pale by the bridge. Rachel told the reporter Elena at the local paper, and Elena came with a camera and a list of questions that sought cause and offered the town the relief of an explanation. The exchange with the passenger included longer stretches of speech, pauses where the car and the world felt as if listening, and accusations that stitched together old memories and new fear. Each line of dialogue was a stake hammered into the roadside, and every person who drove that stretch after felt a new awareness of the hours and the spaces we had assumed harmless. When the third encounter came, it built to a kind of negotiated terror, the kind that forces choices. This was the longest meeting and the closest to a confrontation. I was driving with a night-shift playlist, and the temperature had dropped so low the air in the vents tasted metallic. We were on the bridge that people used to cross away from town when traffic was bad. The backseat passenger began to talk without preface. "You come by so often," they said. "You take the same turn." Me: "We are all sick of small talk right now. State your name." Passenger: "Names are things you borrow. Call me Hollow." Jenna: "Hollow, what do you want?" Hollow: "Not what you expect. To be seen, to be remembered." Mark: "We can call someone, we can take you to the hospital." Hollow: "Hospitals close their doors. They have not the measure for me." Louise: "You are scaring us. Fear is a precise thing. It tells me where hands will go for courage. Why are you in my car? Because you listen between sounds. Because you remember the nights that no one asked about. Officer Hayes arrived this time because a neighbor, Tom, had seen our headlights and called from his porch. He approached slowly and spoke, "Step out with your hands visible." Hollow did not move the way a person moves. Hollow tilted their head as if listening to a distant radio and said, "When you file a report, you leave a path. Follow it, and you will see the places that do not forget." This exchange stretched, each sentence punctuated by the creak of the suspension and the taut breathing of people who had begun to bargain with a thing that might be dead or might be only very clever. The tension swelled when I realized leaving the scene might strand someone in a state that was neither alive nor gone. And staying might endanger people who had done nothing but ask for a ride. In the end, we agreed to let the sheriff open an investigation if the passenger agreed to identify a place that mattered. Hollow named a set of coordinates near the Tucker barn and told us a story about a child who had been left on a winter night. It sounded like myth and like a report at the same time. The choices we made felt like moving chess pieces under a blanket of fog. The investigation that followed was procedural and strangely humanizing. Dr. Patel took swabs in a manner that was both clinical and kind, explaining the chain of custody as she worked. "A swab will be taken from the seat seam and an evidence bag will be labeled," she said, while her gloved hands picked out the small fiber with tweezers. "We cannot promise a match, but we can maintain the integrity of the sample." I remember her saying "inconclusive" a few weeks later with the same neutral cadence she used when nothing matched and when she wanted to avoid making promises. The county lab ran a fiber analysis and a partial DNA assay that did not match any profile in the state database. They called some of it "inclassifiable" in the report, a term that read like a polite shrug on paper. Forensic tech Louis submitted the buffed notes, and an external lab recommended sequencing of mitochondrial markers because the sample was degraded. The recommendation went up the chain, and the sheriff filed for additional funding. It felt at times like bureaucratic glue applied to something that needed more than forms. I was told in clear terms what could and could not be learned from physical evidence, and learned the small language of forensic certainty and its limits. Chain of custody ensures we can use this in court, but it does not create a narrative, Dr. Patel said. And I carried that phrase around in my head. News spread the way small towns pass files from door to door. The local paper ran Elena's piece and labeled it a human interest oddity. Pastor Miguel from the town church organized a meeting at the fire hall because people wanted to talk and because talking felt like an action. At that meeting, names were called and hands offered coffee. Tom from the East Lane described the headlights. Rachel read her account aloud. Sam brought notes. He had seen the figure by the wall and had taken a photo, though the image was grainy. Officer Hayes attended and took notes. Sheriff Crane promised to increase patrols. The meeting included more than 5 people who took concrete steps. Pastor Miguel offered a prayer and then practical advice about locking barns after sunset. Elena suggested a rota of volunteers to walk the road with flashlights. Neighbor Kayla, who ran the diner, brought a pot of strong coffee and the idea of posting a schedule of drivers so people could avoid being alone at certain hours. There was a sense that the town wanted to reassert control, to stamp a pattern of human activity over that which felt inhuman. The conversation expanded to include the school board and a decision to fund extra lighting along the stretch near the bridge. People swapped stories at the meeting in the way a community stitches a batch of small experiences into a quilt of care. 1 month later, the immediate fear had smoothed into a cautious routine. I had installed a dash cam and reviewed the footage in a wakeful way, hoping for clarity but expecting only fragments. The dash cam caught a shimmer in the rear window at 2:13 a.m., but nothing definitive. At 3 months, the sheriff released a terse update. Evidence collected as per Report 22-14-17 had been analyzed. Some fibers remained unclassified. DNA returned no match in state databases, and the forensic report recommended continued monitoring. The county installed 2 poles with motion-activated lights near the bridge, and Millersfield allocated funds for more night patrols. At 6 months, there was a community watch that coordinated with the sheriff and a local volunteer named Denise, who started a small online forum where people could share sightings and timestamps. The ring found under the seat was cataloged but not matched to any missing persons reports. Some nights the road felt quieter, wrapped in the new light and the company of people walking together, while other nights the idea of something waiting in the dark remained like a bruise you notice when you are alone. For me, the practical changes were small and real. I changed my routes sometimes, logged odd fares in a personal notebook, and slept with the porch light on when storms rolled in. People told me I had been brave to speak out, and others said I had done the only reasonable thing by being meticulous in how I recorded and reported the incidents. I am left with a mixture of facts and impressions. Officially, the file remains open and inconclusive. Dr. Patel called the samples inconclusive but unusual and recommended further sequencing if funding allowed. The sheriff recorded public statements and increased patrols. Elena wrote updates that preceded public attention and kept a slow pressure on the county to follow through. Pastor Miguel reported that prayer and practical safety measures had comforted some but not all. The ring stayed locked in an evidence locker. The fiber was in a labeled envelope. The dashcam footage was grainy and sometimes suggestive, but nothing legally decisive. More importantly, people changed how they moved through the town. The bridge gained a new reputation. Tucker Barn was boarded more securely, and a small group of neighbors started checking in on drivers and on each other. In the months that followed, there were scattered reports, some aligning with the pattern of tapping and naming, others merely a passing feeling of being watched. A map slowly formed on my notes, dots of time and place that suggested a corridor of occurrences. I shared those with a reporter and with the sheriff and with a small community of people online who catalog anomalies. It felt like building a file out of fragments. I do not pretend to have answers. I know how to collect data and to describe sensations. The smell of pennies and dryer lint, a 3-knock pattern on the glass, the pale skin that did not reflect light in a usual way, the way a voice could pronounce a name that matched my profile. I know that the institutions was methodical and that their tools yielded some data and many questions. I know that communities can adapt and that small safety measures can make roads feel less lonely. I also know that telling the story was a remedy for me, a way of turning an experience that tried to make me mute into a record. At 1 month, the town had lights and a dashcam I now trusted. At 3 months, the county lab had labeled evidence and asked for more funds. At 6 months, we had a community watch and a repository of witness accounts that made it harder for any single explanation to be dismissed as a lone mistake. If you have a memory like this, if a passenger spoke your name in the dark, or if tiny knocks found your car window, share it. Start your comment with, "This story reminded me," and tell where and when it happened, because the pattern is what helps us understand whether this is visitation or coincidence. I still drive those roads. I still feel the small lift of the hair on my arms when fog closes in. I keep my dashcam running and my phone charged, and I check the back seat before I open the door. I sleep with the porch light on, and I have joined a message chain with Sam, Jenna, and Louise so that we can log anything unusual. The ring under the seat remains an unresolved object, the fiber an odd sequence, and the voice that named me a riddle I carry. Sometimes, late at night at a stoplight, I look at the rear view and half expect to see that pale face returning to the seams. Some doors close with a click and never reopen. Others wait as if someone might reach back and open them from the outside. If you want me to keep looking into this, to follow the documents, and to update when new reports arrive, subscribe and I will bring the records forward. There is a slow justice in names on paper and in lights on the road, and there is a human need to be heard that I do not pretend to fully explain. If you are here for investigations with notes and witness statements, stay with this channel. If you have a line to add to the map, leave it below and I will read it. A small knock on glass is a small thing, but if enough of them line up on the same road, they become an argument for attention, and that is where patterns begin.